most, if not all of their time, doing the exact antithesis of this. That is to say that they'll be celebrating their chains and expressing unwavering gratitude to the very authoritarian who enslaves them. It's too easy these days. It's too easy to sort of bash God and talk about the moral implications of religion, but it seems like we're beating a dead horse at this point. It's been done. The books have been written, and we've all heard sort of celestial North Korea before, but nothing seems to change. And if you ask me, the reason for this is because you're not going to convince anybody just by talking about the moral implications of religion.
Well, so kind of what do you think about that? Because, like, I'm thinking,
Well,
you know,
what I don't understand is I don't see how what he's doing with his channel is any different than what atheists have been doing for forever now.
yeah, that's very true. Because, I mean, they've all been addressing the Kalam cosmological argument.
I mean, there's probably like 50 videos by famous atheists across the spectrum, or rather across a span of like 10 years addressing this argument, and then arguments like it. I don't really know what contrast he's trying to draw.
And as well, not to spoil anything, but as we mentioned like earlier, the theoretical bullshit already kind of went through this.
Yeah, like what is it, 6 years ago? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, but like what he was saying about the whole moral thing, I mean, I think that it's part of it is, I think that he's somewhat correct that, you know, if we think that God exists, we're not going to accept moral objections.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's kind of where he's going, and to that extent, he's right, of course. I mean, if I accept that God exists, I'm not gonna buy your divine North Korea BS, and I think he understands that.
Right, and I think like part of that, the reason for that is because, you know, we see God as the ground for goodness itself.
I don't think he gets that. Like, I don't think he understands Christianity in that light. I think I don't think he conceptualizes our notion of God as the ground of being and goodness. I think he sees God as like as subject, you know, to the Euthyphro dilemma of God being, or maybe not even the Euthyphro dilemma, but along, you know, a nominalist caricature of God as pure divine will, where anything he wills is just good arbitrarily, that kind of thing.
Right, or just a divine dictator where things are good because he's going to punish you if not, is what it seems like.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's continue.
Yep. In order to change somebody's ability to secularize their politics and education, you have to create the wiggle room that allows them to do so. What I mean by that is that if you just go around talking about God as an evil dictator, nobody cares, because it's God. He can do what he likes. The only way that you're going to change somebody's mind on this is by saying, well, perhaps this God doesn't even exist. And then maybe...
I don't understand how that's a contrast at all.
Maybe that's a good...
That's what they've been doing for years.
Yeah. I mean, probably every single atheist I know of. Well, I guess Thunderfoot hasn't, but he just focuses on creationism. Wait, no, he has as well. He's addressed the Kalam cosmological.
They just do both. I mean, I really don't. That's literally what atheist channels. Let's probably like, if any atheist channel that's dedicated to atheism has at least 25% of its content dedicated to trying to dismantle arguments for God's existence. I don't know. Maybe this is just a point to go after, but
well, no, I am glad that he's addressing this argument at least.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, that's good.
Excuse to not allow him to influence.
By the way, I'm not even sure I buy the Kalam, but it's just fun to argue against.
No, I don't necessarily like the argument either. Yeah. But to attack it on the grounds of, you know, causality as he does later is kind of silly.
We'll get into that, of course. So we'll keep it going, I guess.
Yeah.
So today I wanted to talk about, well, I've been afforded 30 minutes to talk about what I think is one of the oldest arguments in the book. The reason being that if you speak to anybody of any age with little to no philosophical experience and ask them why perhaps they're an agnostic or a believer, you'll almost invariably be met with the same response, and it's something along the lines of this. Where did it all come from? If there's no cause, if there's no God, then why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist at all?
Okay,
And if
here's
you
one
ask
thing where
me,
we could
this is
say.
actually
I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure the Kalam cosmological argument doesn't really deal with the question of why is there something rather than nothing.
Hmm.
I don't think that's exactly the argument. I think it more has to do with infinite chains, temporal infinite chains, and a cause preceding that. I think the question of just in itself, the question of something, why is there something rather from nothing, is more for arguments from contingency. But I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying,
Mhm.
because that's like one of my issues with the Kalam, actually, because ultimately it seems like a sort of delayed argument from contingency,
Yeah. I
because
think
it
it's yeah.
yeah go,
No, go ahead.
okay, but it's like, so yeah, I mean, it has a beginning, and that beginning is contingent, therefore, you can argue for a necessary being at that point. Actually, I think I've seen William Lane Craig kind of pivot to the argument from contingency whenever certain things are
Yeah,
challenged.
I think basically, I don't think the Kalam, but the Kalam just in itself doesn't really focus on the question. I think to get to the something rather from nothing argument would be once you try to establish attributes of that God that you've that you've presumably proven. But anyway, we can continue, I suppose.
Okay.
actually a primitive form of a cosmological argument. I think that's why Apple charged $3,000 for their laptops. Cosmological simply means that which pertains to the origin and development of the universe, so cosmology. So a cosmological argument just talks about where things came from. And these arguments are as old as time. They date back at least as far as the ancient Greeks. You guys know who that is? Aristotle. Yeah, great. Who talked about an unmoved mover. This is one of the sort of oldest recorded versions of a cosmological argument. But of course,
Ready
Aristotle
to
was
see
a
him butcher
polytheist
this
and he
one,
believed in
maybe.
an eternal universe.
Yeah.
But his works did influence theologians of the future, not least this guy. This is Thomas Aquinas, a 13th century theologian and monk, who famously in his unfinished work Summa Theologica presented 5 famous ways of proving God. The first 3 of which are the ones that we care about. The others are equally bad, but less relevant. You can see they all sort of basically rely on the same kind of logic. If there's movement in the universe, there must be a first mover. If there's causes in the universe, there must be a first cause. There must be some kind of non-contingent being. Otherwise, how did anything get here? But of course, it takes but the logic of a 5-year-old to say, okay, well, if everything needs a cause, then what caused God?
Oh my gosh.
I didn't think he was gonna make that much of a blunder. I thought he was starting off to where I'm like, maybe he kind of gets it, but
Well, he gets a
wow.
little bit better later on, but
Maybe we should say something about that. I mean,
but yeah, that's what I was gonna say, because like, um, you know, it the well, all these arguments start with that they don't say everything needs a cause, and I think that he hasn't actually read these arguments,
yeah,
because he seems to think, as you'll see later on, he seems to think that, well, in the past, people were like, well, everything needs a cause, therefore God, or something like that.
yeah. Well,
But
this is really not what the argument says. It basically
yeah,
says there's this specific kind of contingency, and given that specific kind of contingency, that cannot go on indefinitely. But it's based on one specific kind of contingency, whether it be changeability or contingency or efficient causality. Um, Given these kinds of causal chains, those cannot go on indefinitely. It's not
yeah,
starting with the premise that everything needs a cause, because then obviously the question of what caused God would apply, but that's not what it's saying.
right. So, like, for example, in the argument for motion, which I have a video on, the first premise is that whatever is changing must be changed by another.
Yeah.
And since God doesn't change, God doesn't have to be changed by another. And this is the argument that Aristotle came up with. And I've read Aristotle's original argument. It's not everything needs a cause. That was never his argument.
The reason that God could not have a cause has to do with the logic of the argument, right?
Right.
That's what it's trying to establish. That's what the argument is establishing in its own logic. To ask who created God is to fallaciously assume that the logic of the argument fails before we even address the logic of the argument.
Yep. I think we got that.
Yeah. Question. But a few centuries earlier, in fact, in Islamic theological circles, people such as Al-Kindi and Al-Ghazali were talking about this very thing. And they effectively changed one of the premises. Instead of saying that everything has a cause, now all of a sudden it's that everything that begins to exist has a cause. That's the change.
Yeah, and that's 100% false.
Right.
So it is true that they changed it to whatever begins to exist, because that's what the Kalam cosmological argument was about. But the original premise was not that everything that exists has a cause.
And it's not even one, like, he acts like there's this one argument and then there's another argument. No, it's like a whole bunch of different arguments and then another argument, right?
Yeah.
They're different arguments.
What I thought was hilarious was that he points out that, these people before Aquinas corrected this, but then why didn't Aquinas have that correction? It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That they made, and that's what gave us what we call the Kalam cosmological argument. Kalam simply is the Arabic word for to argue or discuss. And eventually this has been going around for many years, and one of the reasons that most of us here may have heard of the argument is because of Western philosophers such as this guy. This is Dr. William Lane Craig, who wrote a book in 1979 called The Kalam Cosmological Argument. Now, let it not be said that I'm trying to tamper with anybody's premises here. I've gone straight to his website, reasonablefaith.org, if that's not an oxymoron, if you ever heard one, and got the premises for his version of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which, in effect, goes as follows. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, therefore, the conclusion, the universe has a cause. Seems pretty simple, in fact, almost deceptively simple if you ask me. It's one of the reasons why it's such a seductive argument and has lasted for so long. We are dealing with an antique here, okay, so we can't be taking this kind of stuff lightly. But that's pretty much the history lesson over. I thought I'd fill you in. I'm sure that many of you are already familiar with the argument, starting with Aristotle through Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, and Thomas Aquinas, William Lane Craig, and finally, it's ours to play with.
Yeah, so I know you can't see the video here, but he kind of has these arrows as if it progresses from Aristotle to what was it? To the Arab scholars, to Aquinas, to William Lane Craig, and then to
that's
our
all
time.
over the place.
but that's not even correct, because it's more like Aristotle had the argument, and then kind of it influenced. I think it influenced the Arab scholars, but William Lane Craig pulled his argument from the Arab scholars. He didn't pull it all from Aquinas.
William Lane Craig. None of Aquinas' arguments even touch on the question of the temporal origin of the universe. So I mean, it's not like it's further derivative of Aquinas. Aquinas isn't even a middleman here. But anyway,
well, he's between Aristotle and us.
No, he is. But I mean, like he's not. Aquinas isn't really even relevant to that because
to the Kalam, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Stay with it, we shall. So, the premises. Most people, when they see this and they're trying to debunk it, they jump straight to the second premise. This seems the easiest to debunk. The reason being is you can simply ask, well, how do you know? How do you know that the universe began to exist? Now, to be sure, the Big Bang happened. Okay, we're pretty certain of it at this point, but the Big Bang never claimed to be the beginning of everything. only the beginning of everything that we know of. There's nothing to say that our Big Bang wasn't just the death of a prior universe, or that there's some kind of infinite multiverse, or perhaps even one large space-time fabric with localized areas of activity, one of which is our universe. Now, what we could do is say, well, you can't prove that this is the case.
So I just want to make a note here. I actually kind of agree with him. Because, but to be fair, William Lane Craig does make arguments from science and philosophy to try to demonstrate that there's a beginning. He doesn't just say, "Oh, well, the Big Bang happened, therefore that was the beginning."
Okay, you could do wait 1 second. You can kind of continue. I'll be right back, and
Okay.
I'll pick up where you're at.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
So the argument's flawed, it's debunked, and we can all go home. But that would be no fun, and so I don't want to focus on premise 2. We're going to give the theist the benefit of the doubt here, and instead talk about premise 1. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, there are a number of glaring issues with this, some of which may have already immediately occurred to you, but I'll be interested to see if you have any more. But the first problem that I have with this is, well, if you look at the argument, firstly, one of the reasons it's so persuasive is because it comes across as a deductive argument. That is to say that if you agree with the premises, you cannot disagree with the conclusion. This is fair to say. So we're not going to be able to debunk this by talking about the relationship between the premises and the conclusion, but by talking about the premises themselves. And although this is a deductive argument, it relies upon inductive reasoning. Now, I don't have to spell this.
Just to be clear, it doesn't necessarily rely on inductive reasoning, because even the second premise, you can have a philosophical deductive argument for the second premise, as you can have for the first premise. But we'll continue and see what he says.
Out to you, but in effect, picture yourself, if you will, on a desert island. This island happens to be inhabited by cats. Now, you have no contact with the outside world. Every cat on the island is black. You might be tempted to then conclude that every cat in existence is black, which, of course, we know is not the case. Seems a perfectly reasonable assumption for this guy to make, but we know it's not true. So just because everything we've seen beginning to exist has a cause, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything that begins to exist has a cause.
And I think that's a mistake in the way that we think about inductive reasoning, because yeah, just because we observe every cat has a...
Okay, I'm back.
Okay, so he just argued that he had an analogy where he had a bunch of black cats, and this guy was on the island and he saw a bunch of black cats, and he was like, well, just because you see a bunch of black cats, that doesn't mean that cats are only black, right? So it's like the whole black swan argument, basically. But I kind of disagree with that, because, I agree with his conclusion, but I think that we have the capacity to intuit forms, basically.
Yeah.
Because if my argument has always been, okay, well, so they found a black swan, and they were like, oh, swans aren't black. I mean, swans aren't all white. But if you look at it, they did, how come whenever they went to Florida and saw an alligator, they weren't like, oh my gosh, it's a green swan?
Yeah. I mean, it's we can distinguish substance from accident.
Right.
So
exactly.
that doesn't inhibit our ability to, again, interpret universals, universals and forms.
Right.
But of course, this isn't a fatal flaw. Science is based on induction. It has to be. And it's just worth bringing up because of the case that it seems to be a deductive argument, but really the logic that it's based upon isn't. But just with that out of the way, the first most pressing issue that I come across with this argument is what's known as the fallacy of composition. You may already be familiar with it. In effect, the fallacy of composition occurs when you take a characteristic of the constituent parts of a whole and apply that characteristic to the whole itself. So, as an example, picture, if you will, a brick wall. Now, the constituent parts of the brick wall are, of course, the bricks. Now, we could be tempted to make the argument, every brick in the wall is red, therefore, the wall is red. Perfectly sound. Nothing wrong with that. And this is why the fallacy is so seductive, because it works some of the time. But the fallacy lies in assuming that it works all of the time, which it does not. For example, if we shrink the brick, we now might be tempted to say, well, every brick is small, therefore the wall is small, right? Well, of course, this isn't the case. You can have a very large wall with very small bricks, and there are countless examples of this that you can find. No atom is alive, therefore nothing made of atoms can be alive. Obviously, this is not the case. Bertrand Russell.
Yeah, I actually think he explained that pretty well.
Yeah, the issue though is like it doesn't apply to the argument, because what the
Right.
argument is saying is that it's just focusing, it's doing a metaphysical analysis on the concept of beginning, right? Beginning to exist. And so if that analysis is sound, then if the universe began to exist, then it would need a cause. So it all hinges upon whether that specific analysis is sound.
Yeah, no, I just remembered the person that I talked to, that I was going back and forth on this, is his name is Martimer or something, Martimer some number, but he makes the same argument, and basically the idea is that, well, we have basically the way he thinks that we're determining what causes are is by saying, oh, well, we see some things having causes, therefore the whole has a cause. And that's not really how we go about it, really.
Right, it isn't.
Yeah.
Because it's focusing on specific causal relations and making a deduction based on those relations.
In a famous BBC debate, put it this way: I can illustrate what seems to me your fallacy. Every man who exists has a mother, and it seems to me that your argument is that therefore the human race must have a mother. But obviously the human race hasn't a mother. That's a different logical sphere.
Okay, so I know what it is.
Every sheep in a herd.
Have you watched that debate?
I think I have, yeah. Or I listened to the audio of it.
It boggles the mind to me how we could look at that debate and think Russell won the argument against Copleston. But okay,
yeah,
neither here nor there.
The herd has a mother, but the herd doesn't have a mother itself. Everything in the universe may have a cause, but that doesn't mean that the universe itself has a cause. And this is, in effect, the fallacy of composition. The next thing to talk about is causality, because this is what the argument relies upon. Causality is the relationship between cause and effect. Now, of course, logically, we all know that on a timeline, cause must always precede effect. This is just a law of the universe. You cannot have a cause and effect occur at the same time, and you certainly can't have a cause occur after its effect. And this is what the argument is effectively based upon.
Well, I mean,
there's
that's
a problem in
not true.
this,
I mean, you
and
can
it's similar to the fallacy of composition. The problem with this is time.
Sorry, what were you saying?
The cause and effect canon is simultaneous. Not always in time, but certainly can be in time.
Right. Yeah. That's the whole scholastic, distinction between scholastics and Hume.
Yeah, exactly.
Hume thought that effects or causes were prior to their effects.
Right.
Whereas,
I mean, like, for example, my molecular structure currently is causing me to exist. That's simultaneous causation. Yeah.
Yep.
For something to come before something else, we require time. The Kalam cosmological argument relies on causality, that causes come before effects, that the universe must have a cause, because the universe is an effect, it must have a cause, and the cause must come before that effect, and if it's before or outside of the universe, it must be supernatural, and that's pretty godly. But the problem is, when everything came into existence, that includes time. Okay, in the early 20th century, Einstein showed that time and space are just two sides of the same coin. So, if time came into existence at the Big Bang, or the large Big Bang, whatever caused the everything to come into existence, if we're assuming again that the Big Bang was the beginning of everything, because we are giving the theist the benefit of the doubt, that would include time. So to say that a cause of the universe came before the universe, well, there was no before the universe. Perhaps when there's no time, causes can occur at the same time or after their effects, or maybe causes aren't needed at all. again, what we're doing is we're saying everything in the universe, every effect in the universe has a cause, therefore the universe itself has a cause. But this again is sort of another form of the fallacy of composition. You can't apply the same logic to the universe just because that logic applies to things within the universe itself. This is...
Yeah, but that's not how it actually works.
Right.
And also, like, sometimes some kinds of, like, as you mentioned earlier, some kinds of arguments from composition are valid. So one thing I wanted to point out is that the whole is dependent on the parts for its existence.
Mm-hmm.
But so if all the parts are being caused, then it would seem that the whole would also be caused, because
Right.
without the parts, the whole wouldn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also worth noting that it's again, it all hinges upon the notion of things beginning to exist. The idea of things beginning to exist, if that relation is contingent in itself, then that would also have to apply to the universe if it began to exist. So its focus should be on that, not necessarily on the differential between universe and things in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Is the fallacy of the argument. And these are interesting points. And the reason that I bring these up is because when you're discussing this with somebody, you might know that an argument sounds bad. You might not quite be able to put your finger on it, but you know that something's wrong, like the ontological argument. A lot of people have a problem with. So it's always good to have some arguments under your belt. But the thing is, and I sincerely hope that you don't feel I've wasted all of your precious time, but it doesn't actually matter. Everything that I've said so far, the causality, the composition, the fallacy of composition, the inductive reasoning, it doesn't make a difference. And the reason is because there's an even more glaring issue that's staring us right in the face that I ignored for so long until somebody showed it to me and I thought, my God, how didn't I think of that before? And I said my God because old habits die hard.
By somebody, does he mean theoretical BS?
Probably. I would think.
The problem is in the first premise, again, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Now, people don't spend enough time just thinking about what this implies. When have you ever seen anything begin to exist?
Yes.
Here's the thing. He completely ignores and doesn't even try to address, and I don't even think knows about, the concept of formal causality. You know, he's eventually going to talk about how, well, everything is just a change in rearrangements. But he doesn't even address the fact that there's a glaring objection to that from formal causality. You know, the idea that a thing's form, the thing taking on a new form, is a new thing coming into existence. It's not just reducible to material rearrangements.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure he holds to reductionism and nominalism, but
yeah, well, we'll tackle that when he talks about that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I made a little list. Examples of things that have been created out of nothing, that's what that means. Firstly, of course, we have the universe. When the universe came into existence, it truly did come into existence out of nothing. Okay, because for the universe to be born, if there was something before it, then that would be encompassed by the universe. So this did truly begin to exist out of nothing. Second, it's not broken at all. That's it. That is it. The universe. There's nothing else. Now, okay, sure. What about a car, you say? There's a mini plant just down the road from where I live in Oxford, England. And cars come into existence all the time there. But do they really? I mean, sure, a car might come into existence, but haven't we really just rearranged a bunch of pre-existing stuff and given it a new name? I mean, if I rearrange the order of these chairs and call it something else, nothing's begun to exist. I've just rearranged something. A car is made by...
Except for its form, like you were saying.
Yeah, so how do we know that? I mean, I think the most obvious way is to look at living systems, because they have, teleology built in. So
Hmm.
like for example, like take a tree for example. It grows as a unity. It grows as a unified organism that's not reducible to its chemical composition, because it's its end states, to take in nutrients to grow, is derivative not of any specific or of any particular parcel of its material makeup, but it's derivative of its essence as a tree. So, yes, it is true that the tree comes into existence from previous material, but it is a new unity, a new substance, um,
Yeah. So
coming into existence.
we have a comment on the live stream that I'll go. Somebody says that's only applicable if the universe is a new form.
Well, I kind of reject the idea that the universe is a substance. I mean, the universe is just a what's the term? An accidental unity. Basically, the
Mhm.
aggregate of substances, the aggregate of objects, right? Um, I don't really treat the universe as a whole as
Yeah.
anything having.
But more importantly, I think is the issue is we're trying to determine whether things in our everyday life are
Right,
actually
that's true.
becoming coming to be, and the universe has already been admitted by CosmicSkeptic to have come to be. So it seems that comment seems to miss the point.
Mhm.
But so my thing with the forms has always been, so I mean, we have them in our minds, right? That's what conceptions are basically. It's just
Right.
the immaterial form extracted from things. And if you were to deny that, then that would be to deny that our conceptions actually match reality,
Hmm.
which seems like an absurd position to me.
Right, and the thing is the form is inherent in the object.
Hmm.
Um, and when a thing comes into existence, uh, say a new substance, Aristotle has this notion of prime matter, right? Whereby um, there is an underlying kind of substratum that is receptive to any form in general, and that accounts for how you can have substantial change. Um, so we already have this metaphysics as to how we can coherently say that things really do come into being and pass away. That doesn't uh, that is not subject to collapsing into the reductionism that cosmic skeptic is. And the thing is like I don't feel like we have to come up with a from the ground up defense of substantial change and that kind of thing, because he hasn't even addressed it. I think he's just assuming that his atomism is I always struggle on this word, eliminativist atomism is
Yeah.
true. He's not really trying. He's not addressing arguments from formal cause or anything like that. But the thing is, it's not just he's simply reducing it to the material cause. He doesn't even consider formal cause as being the principle whereby we can truly say that a new thing as a unified substance is really coming into existence, even if it's from previously existing material.
Hmm. So the same guy says that if we're using a new label to identify the universe, then you're risking equivocation. But the issue for me with the Kalam cosmological argument is that it's not saying that there is this particular kind of cause. It doesn't specify. It's a
Yeah.
more general kind of cause. So we're not comparing the two and saying, oh well, we see there's causes inside of like cars, for example, and therefore there's also going to be
It's
causes.
not making that distinction at all. I mean, it is
Yeah.
basically saying that if we can say coherently that things begin to exist, right? Which I think we can, and then there's a whole system of thought that establishes that cosmic skeptic has not addressed.
Mm-hmm.
If we can coherently say that things begin to exist, then we can analyze that relationship of beginning to exist and say that, well, uh, being cannot arise out of non-being. Therefore, if the universe is such that it also begins to exist, then since that relationship is common to the objects that we see going in and out of existence and the universe, then the metaphysical analysis that works for the same relationship would hold in both instances.
Right. And just to let people in the chat know, I'm thinking about if Classical Theist can stick around, opening this for more people to enter in if they want to.
Oh yeah.
Okay, but just at this point, I think it would be a good time to just to explain the basic reason why I think the principle of causality applies. It's because I take the position of Scott Sullivan, where he says whatever exists has to have that in virtue of which it is distinguished from nothing, either in itself or in another. So if you were to say, well, so something that important to note is it doesn't actually distinguish between cars and the universe. It's just anything that exists has to be distinguished from nothing by something, right? And it can't be distinguished from nothing by nothing, because nothing is nothing. So it wouldn't make any sense. Mm-hmm. So that's more the way that I would approach it from a concept of what being is, what it is to be,
right?
And just some kind of scientific observation.
There's also the idea that if we say that something comes into being out of non-being, then I think you have to be somewhat committed to the notion that non-being has ontological status, right? Because you would have to reify the status of non-being from which a new thing is coming to be, and that is incoherent. I think I don't think you can do that. I think it would ultimately violate the principle of non-contradiction, because then non-being would be and not be at the same time and in the same respect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that drives with you? That's kind of on the spot.
Right. All right, let's continue.
Okay.
Rearranging car parts, which obviously I have a very extensive knowledge of. Your engine, windshield washer. Anyway, that's also made out of parts. These are the parts of an engine. And the engine parts break down into metallic atoms, and of course atoms break down to subatomic particles. But you see the problem here, because particles themselves, the atoms that are inside us and inside most of the things that we touch and interact with, the heavier ones were created inside stars, but those themselves came out of something that was pre-existing. So helium was caused by hydrogen just fusing. Hydrogen itself was fused in the early conditions of the universe when things were hot and dense enough to fuse into atoms, and you've gone so far back now that, well, hey presto, you're at the beginning of the universe.
I don't understand what his point is. I mean, because
begin to
go ahead.
Because you're saying anything that comes into existence from something previously existing, right? And then he's going to say we only know of one instance where something comes from nothing, therefore the two aren't comparable. Well, what we're saying is that, or not what we're saying, what someone who would defend the Kalam cosmological argument would say is that, things come into existence from previously existing things. That's why if the universe comes into existence, there would have to be a previously existing reality, right? I mean...
All right. Well, sorry, I was reading the comments.
Right.
But I don't know. This guy that we were talking to, he said, so did the universe come from non-being or from being? I don't know from being, obviously, because if something was distinguished, something cannot be distinguished from nothing by nothing. And whatever distinguishes something from nothing, that is what makes it actual.
Yeah, and ultimately, the first cause is identified by St. Thomas as pure being, right? Pure subsistent being.
Oh, he's saying, did it come from creation ex nihilo or creation ex materia? I actually think this is a good point. The way that, because what it actually means, creation ex nihilo in the Christian context, is that he didn't use any God didn't use any pre-existing material.
Right.
Right.
But he is God himself. Like, but it's still not like being arising out of non-being.
Right.
That's not what's happening here. It's God not making use of any previously existing material, but being the creative ground,
right,
from which
so actually
being could come to be.
If you look at the story of Genesis, what he says is, "Let there be light," for example. He just says, "Let there be." And I think that's kind of an insight into how God actually creates, because he kind of attaches his being to the form that he has within him, basically. And
yeah, it's Gabriel Grange talks about the self-diffusiveness of God's goodness, whereby it's most intimately fulfilled within the essence himself through the Trinity, right? But that principle of divine self-diffusion is overflowed to yield created being.
Yeah, because something I was thinking about is because everything that, whatever's in the effect must pre-exist in the cause. Basically, the principle of proportionate causality.
Right.
All the forms exist in a unified way in God, and then so it's not that this didn't pre-exist in God. It's not like it came from nothing. It just means that there wasn't some material thing that it came from.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I was saying. No, the Kalam Cosmological Argument doesn't even say that. Yeah,
yeah.
Let's just continue.
Okay. This guy says it's special pleading, but I don't know why he thinks that. But let's continue.
Well, we might address that later.
Unless by that you mean the beginning of the universe, but then that's just encompassed by our list. So the universe really is the only thing that has truly begun to exist. Okay, anything that you can think of, you may have seen a child being born or a tree being planted. It's just a rearrangement of pre-existing matter. Even when you turn on a light or turn on a heater, energy cannot be created or destroyed. And another one of Einstein's biggest findings was that energy and matter are the same thing.
But
so
even if that's true, though, I mean, let's grant his premise, okay, that the universe is the only thing which truly began to what the Kalam Cosmological Argument does is it metaphysically analyzes the mere concept of beginning to exist. So, and it derives from that analysis a need for an extrinsic cause. So if it happens once or many times, it doesn't matter. If it happens once, then we get the principle of an extrinsic cause. I don't see why he has to deconstruct things like this.
Yeah.
Can begin to exist except for the universe itself. As Carl Sagan put it, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. In fact, you can actually get his apple pie recipe, starting with one universe as your first ingredient. Preparation time, 12 to 20 billion years. Specifically, 13.8. Of course, the point that he's trying to make is that the only thing that really began to exist is the universe. Everything else is just rearranging. Another contention which goes hand in hand is the idea of getting something from nothing. Now, when you listen to more experienced
here we go.
theologians, people who have had a lot of time in the modern era to listen to the scientific arguments, people such as this guy. Oh, sorry, he got fired, didn't he?
Showing Bill O'Reilly.
People like Bill O'Reilly, I don't understand why. Just to digress for a minute, I mean, they put him on the same pedestal. They get him debating people like Silverman and Dawkins as if they have the same sort of theological.
Well, they were both equally credible on the issue of religion.
That's true. To be fair, Yeah, well, Sarah Silverman for sure.
Yeah. Bill O'Reilly is like more credible than Sarah Silverman. I don't know
Yeah.
what this guy's talking about.
I mean, I thought that he did pretty bad in that debate.
Yeah, he did do poorly, but I mean, still, on the issue of religion,
Yeah.
I don't see how Dawkins has any more credibility than Bill O'Reilly.
Right.
It's absolutely fantastic. But one of the things that it's good for is you get to see what everyday people who aren't interested in this stuff generally say to these kind of arguments. And the main thing that comes from it is, well, how can something come from nothing? This is a contention that I hear all the time. If something can come from nothing, why doesn't it happen all the time? Okay, if things can just pop into existence, why doesn't a car just appear right here? Well, there's a simple reason for that. The reason is that if you want something to pop into existence out of nothing, then you need some nothing to try it out on. Okay?
What?
So if a car jumped into existence...
Yeah, so that's a really bad argument.
It's literally incoherent to conceive of non-being having any ontological status whatsoever. And that's why something can't come from nothing, is because non-being has no ontological status.
And if you want to talk about testing out this on nothing, right?
Yeah.
Well, nothing exists just as much now as it ever has.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, we would expect. I mean, it's not as if the fact that things exist now is somehow stopping things from coming from nothing. I don't see how that would be possible.
Right. It doesn't. If you suppose anything coming into being without any cause, then you have posited some operative status to non-being, which is incoherent to begin with.
Yeah,
but
I like how William Wayne Craig puts it. He says, "What makes nothing so picky? Like, why only universes?"
Yeah, exactly.
Existence right here, that wouldn't be out of nothing, because this is not nothing. This is oxygen. This is nitrogen. This is radiation. Okay, so if you want to try and get something popping into existence out of nothing, you need to find some nothing. Now, where are you going to find some nothing in the universe? Well, some of you might say, why not go into deep space? Look for a vacuum, a true vacuum. But the problem is, even that isn't technically nothing. Again, this is brand new science, but if you read works like A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss, which is a fantastic book that I recommend to all of you.
Extremely intellectually dishonest.
Yeah. Yeah, no. The same with, actually, somebody else brought this up, what's his name? Hawking's book as well.
Yeah.
Because they both just say something can come from nothing, and by nothing I mean the laws of gravity or something like that.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd.
Yeah, and just so you guys know, any atheists watching this, the laws of gravity is not nothing. Nothing is the negation of anything.
And first of all, I mean, did it even appeal to laws to begin with? We have no... You can't establish what a law of nature is by science alone. It requires so much philosophical baggage that you don't know what to do with. I mean, what is a law of nature? Is it a regularity? Well, I mean, not really, because we don't really observe many of these laws because they're so idealized anyway. So the regularity theory doesn't really seem to work. I mean, and we only have the regularity theory out of from theological origins, because it used to be considered that laws of nature were just, edicts of the divine will. But then when they got rid of the theology, well, it's been reduced to regularity. So it so much philosophical work is required to even get at what a law of nature is.
Well, yeah, like the idea of the law of nature just existing by itself is kind of ridiculous.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it usually, like the way that Thomas would think about it is a law of nature is just the way things act according to their nature.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But and of course a deeper problem is that, Thomistic arguments, they don't deal with the beginning of the universe.
They don't, not even slightly. That is completely irrelevant.
Right. All right, let's continue.
You find interesting nuggets of information, and I happen to stumble across this. If you removed all of the particles, all of the radiation, absolutely everything from space, and all that remained was nothing, that nothing would weigh something.
Oh my gosh. Uh, oh my goodness. I forgot about that part.
I forgot he actually said that without with a straight face. As straight as Lawrence Krauss's face can be.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah, no, nothing doesn't weigh anything. I'm sorry if you don't understand that. Go back to basic physics. I don't know.
I mean, they're literally using the word nothing as a mere nominal label to describe something that is. It's not only categorically distinct from non-being; it's infinitely. There is an infinite gap between being and non-being. Okay, in any manner of being whatsoever. So.
Yeah, I think what Krauss's problem,
no matter how limited.
Yeah, I think Krauss's problem is that he's coming from like a materialist tradition.
Yeah.
And materialists say that, well, nothing exists except for material. So when from his perspective, science proved that material didn't exist at one point, and that there's other things that exist besides material. Instead of just saying, oh well, we were wrong.
Material is what is what we're going to call nothing.
Right. Yeah. Instead of just saying, "Oh well, I was wrong about materialism," he just calls everything that's
very
not material
disingenuous,
nothing.
Actually.
Yeah. All right.
What this means is that nothing isn't really nothing. So even if you were to find some nothing, it wouldn't really be nothing. Now, of course, most people, including a lot of scientists, think that the weight is being caused by something. There is still something there that we just can't detect, like dark matter. But it's besides the point, because the point remains that we don't.
Oh, I have to just.
Yeah.
Somebody in the comment section here. He's Andrew Wells says, someone lent me Krauss's book for free, and I still didn't get my money's worth.
That's great.
Yeah.
Have any nothing. Okay, so how on earth can you possibly say either A, that things that begin to exist have a cause if you've never seen anything begin to exist? How can you say that? And secondly, how can you say
metaphysical
things like
analysis of the idea of beginning and conjoined with existence?
Right. Yeah, from understanding what it is to be, basically.
Yeah. That's something that you can abstract from a sensible world, even if we didn't experience something actually beginning to exist, which is stupid because we do, given the principle of formal causality. We could still rationally derive the principle of causality from the. The thing is, like because he concedes something beginning to exist, right? He concedes the universe beginning to exist for the sake of argument. So all a defender of the Kalam would have to do is say, well, look, I'm using metaphysical analysis on that instantiation of beginning. Okay?
Yeah.
I
don't think he knows that because he probably holds to scientism. So
yeah, that's true. But the thing is, it's like he can't just get away with all these assertions. He has to anticipate some of these objections.
It's okay. I mean, he's young, to be fair. But
that's
I mean,
true. That's true. I mean, I used the same arguments when I was 18. So I mean, I get that.
But I mean, what does it say about society that we have 18-year-olds talking about this kind of stuff as if they were experts?
I didn't really think of that very well. I mean, I'm all okay with child, or I'm only 21. I'm okay with proteges, but
yeah, me too.
It is just.
But I mean, he clearly hasn't done the background research on this.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like I think CosmicSkeptic is very intelligent. He's very good at abstract thinking and with in the sense of some kind of raw ability, right? It's just that he's really not reading enough material on these topics. Right. It's just a matter of education. It's not a matter because he's very intelligent. I think he just needs to research the other side a bit more.
I mean, I didn't know about Thomism
Exactly.
for sure.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
Something from nothing, if that can happen, why doesn't it happen all the time? If it couldn't, maybe it does happen all the time, where there's nothing. But we don't have any nothing to test it out on.
Yeah, already addressed this.
And this is what I think is the most glaring issue. People don't seem to understand what beginning to exist really means. But what are the implications? Well, if we go back to our premises, again, like I said, I'm focusing on premise one, and this is basically to conclude, but I'm hoping to leave a lot of time for some discussion and conversation, because...
Do you want to get into that?
This isn't something that I've really heard...
If you have anything to say, sure.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, did you want to comment on the question and answer portion of it?
I'm sorry, I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, Cosmic, I think he's going to do a Q&A after his presentation.
Oh, I think not.
Okay.
I think that's going to take too long, and
okay, right.
I think other people would like to get in here.
Oh, okay, good then. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Okay, we'll finish up then.
Yeah. Yeah, this should be over soon.
Many people talk about before, perhaps I'm just missing it, but I'm hoping that at least some of you haven't thought about this specific argument before, so I'm really interested to hear if you have any contentions or anything to add. Because what it breaks down to is, in the context of the Kalam cosmological argument, remember, this isn't a sort of end-all argument. I'm not here trying to prove to you that God does not exist. But the Kalam cosmological argument, and sort of by extension, its sister argument about just where did it all come from, which we've all come across at some point, perhaps we've even asked it ourselves. When somebody brings this argument up, you can simply prove to them how circular it is, in the sense that the premises, once you lay them out, this is what I recommend for you to do. Lay out the premises for them and say, okay, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. Well, we just said that everything that begins to exist, that's just the universe. The universe is the only thing that's begun to exist, right? So when we say whatever begins to exist, well, that's just the universe, because the universe is whatever begins to exist. It's the only thing that can, because if there was something else before it, that would be the universe. But the problem is we now have a bit of an issue, because if we bring in the other premises, premise one, the universe has a cause. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. Of course, the second premise is pretty much redundant.
Okay, here's where I'm going to fault
the
Kalam cosmological argument. I think it would have done much better to add another premise and to say that, and to really focus on the idea of it should start with the premise relating specifically to the logic behind the principle of causality. You know, so you have a metaphysical principle that's prior to temporal beginnings, right? That could kind of address his concern there. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, I mean, his whole thing that he changes it to the universe has a cause, therefore the universe has a cause, right?
Yeah.
Basically. But the issue is that he had to first change the definition of the first premise first, from everything that begins to exist has a cause to everything that begins to exist ex nihilo has a cause. So it's kind of a straw man of the argument.
Yeah.
But this suddenly doesn't seem so convincing. It's almost impressively circular. That's the thing about it. It's persuasive in the sense that you look at it, it looks deductive, it looks like it's sound, it looks like it makes sense, and it seems really simple. But when you break it down, it's circular, it's inductive at its philosophical basis, and it doesn't actually say anything. The universe has a cause, therefore the universe has a cause. And so this is my version of the Kalam cosmological argument. And that's what I have for my presentation.
All right. Well, I think he absolutely failed.
Yeah. Putting it mildly.
Yeah. No, I mean, like the first time I watched this, I was laughing out loud. So
right.
much.
Yeah.
But yeah. All right. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and put up the link and see if anybody joins. I might go ahead and go offline off of the live video because I know some people have been what they call sniping, which is basically a way of getting videos taken down. And
Okay, we should end the live thing then.
yeah, I think I'm gonna end the live stream, and I'll go ahead and post the link in the chat so that people can join. Though, let me go ahead and grab that real quick.
Okay.
Here it is. All right. So yeah, I'll stop streaming now. Thanks everybody for watching.